It was the fall of 2020 when the Thompson family received a call that would change their lives forever. At 2:17 a.m., their home security system had been triggered, alerting local police to an intruder. What made this break-in different was not the forced entry through the kitchen window or the way the intruder had carefully removed her shoes at the door. It was what she said when confronted by officers in the living room, standing beneath the family photos that lined the walls. "I live here," she insisted, her eyes fixed on a particular photograph. A little girl with auburn hair and a missing front tooth, captured mid-laugh during a family vacation to Lake Michigan. That photograph had remained in the same spot for 20 years, a frozen moment from before their world had shattered, before 6-year-old Emma Thompson had vanished without a trace while playing in her front yard. The woman standing in the living room that night was a stranger to the Thompsons, yet she spoke with absolute conviction, eyes never leaving that photograph. "My name is Emma Thompson," she said, "and this is my home." The case of Emma Thompson's disappearance had gone cold long ago, filed away among the thousands of children who vanish every year in America, their families left in a perpetual state of grief and uncertainty. But now, with these 4 words, "I am Emma Thompson," a 20-year-old mystery threatened to unravel, revealing secrets that some had fought desperately to keep buried. Would this mysterious intruder finally provide the answers the Thompson family had spent 2 decades searching for? Or would she only deepen the wound that had never truly healed? The story begins with Emma Thompson's disappearance on September 17, 2000. A day that started like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Millfield, Pennsylvania. Catherine Thompson, Emma's mother, had been preparing lunch while keeping an occasional eye on her daughter through the kitchen window. Emma had been riding her new pink bicycle, a birthday present she'd received just 2 weeks earlier, up and down the sidewalk in front of their colonial-style home. The last time Catherine checked, approximately 11:35 a.m. according to her later police statement, Emma was speaking to someone in a dark-colored sedan that had pulled up to the curb. Catherine had assumed it was a neighbor, or perhaps someone asking for directions. By the time she finished making sandwiches and called Emma in for lunch 5 minutes later, both her daughter and the sedan were gone. The bicycle lay abandoned on the front lawn, its front wheels still spinning slowly in the autumn breeze. What followed was a nightmare familiar to any parent who has experienced the disappearance of a child. The initial panic, the frantic search of nearby streets and parks, the increasingly desperate calls to friends and neighbors. Then came the police, with their question forms and evidence bags, their reassurances that felt increasingly hollow as hours stretched into days. Search parties combed through wooded areas. Emma's face appeared on telephone poles, in store windows, on the evening news. The FBI became involved, specialists in child abduction cases providing profiles and statistics that no parent ever wants to hear. Days turned to weeks and weeks to months. Leads dwindled. The media attention, once feverish, gradually waned. The dark sedan was never identified. No witnesses came forward with actionable information. No ransom demand was ever made. Emma Thompson had simply vanished. Another child added to the database of the missing, her case eventually relegated to periodic reviews by overworked detectives with too many files and too few answers. For the Thompson family, life became divided into 2 distinct periods, before and after. Before was filled with birthday parties and school projects, family vacations, and ordinary arguments over bedtimes and vegetables. After was a persistent ache, a house too quiet, holidays too hollow, and the constant, gnawing uncertainty that proves more unbearable than even grief itself. Robert Thompson, Emma's father, threw himself into the search with an obsession that eventually cost him his job at the architectural firm where he'd worked for 15 years. he established a foundation dedicated to finding Emma and other missing children, becoming a fixture at law enforcement conferences and a vocal advocate for improved resources in child abduction cases. Catherine retreated inward, maintaining Emma's room exactly as it had been the day she disappeared, dusting the shelves of stuffed animals and keeping the sheets fresh, as if her daughter might return at any moment. Their marriage, already strained before the disappearance, couldn't withstand the pressure of their divergent grief. They divorced in 2003, though they remained connected through their shared foundation and the fading hope of finding answers. Jake Thompson, Emma's older brother who had been 14 when she vanished, grew up in the shadow of his sister's absence. He became an FBI agent specializing in crimes against children, his career choice a direct response to the helplessness he had felt as a teenager watching his family disintegrate along with the investigation. The years passed. The Thompson family learned to live with uncertainty, to function despite the questions that haunted their quieter moments. What had happened to Emma? Was she still alive somewhere? Had she suffered? Would they ever know the truth? And then, on that October night in 2020, a woman climbed through the kitchen window of Catherine Thompson's home and claimed to be the daughter who had vanished 20 years earlier. The woman who broke into the Thompson house identified herself as Emma Thompson, but her legal name, according to the driver's license found in her possession, was Eliza Grant, age 26, with a registered address in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, some 300 miles away. She had no criminal record, she worked as a librarian, she lived alone, and she had no apparent connection to Millfield or the Thompson family. Catherine Thompson, now 58, had been visiting her sister in Philadelphia when the break-in occurred. It was the neighbors who heard the alarm and called the police. By the time Catherine rushed back to Millfield the following morning, Eliza Grant had been taken to the county jail and charged with breaking and entering. The attending officers had described a strange encounter. The woman had not attempted to flee or resist arrest. She had seemed confused by their presence, repeatedly insisting that this was her home, that her mother would confirm it when she returned. She had known details about the house's layout that seemed unusual for a random intruder. She had asked about a hidden compartment in the kitchen where the family had once kept emergency cash, a feature installed by the previous owners that the Thompsons themselves had only discovered months after moving in, and which had never been mentioned publicly. When shown the photograph of young Emma, she had touched it with a tenderness that had made even the responding officers uncomfortable. "That's me," she had said simply. "That was the last summer before it happened." Catherine went directly to the jail from the highway, still wearing the clothes she had hastily thrown on at her sister's house. The meeting was brief and conducted through glass, both women studying each other with the intensity of people trying to reconcile the impossible. Catherine saw no physical resemblance to her missing daughter. Eliza Grant had dark hair and eyes, while Emma had been fair with auburn hair. Eliza spoke with certainty about being Emma, describing memories of the house, of her childhood bedroom with its constellation of glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, of the tire swing in the backyard that her father had hung from the oak tree on her 5th birthday. Some details were correct, others were not. She mentioned a dog named Rusty. The Thompsons had never owned a pet. She recalled a pink bedroom with ballet posters. Emma's room had been yellow, decorated with marine animals, a passion sparked by a trip to the aquarium. Catherine left the jail that day more confused than enlightened. She contacted Jake immediately, then reached out to Robert despite their strained relationship. The police advised caution. They had seen cases of false identity claims before, usually from troubled individuals seeking attention or suffering from delusions, sometimes, cruelly, from people attempting to exploit families of the missing for financial gain. DNA testing was scheduled, though results would take time. Meanwhile, the police began investigating Eliza Grant's background, trying to determine how she might have gained information about the Thompson family and their missing daughter. What they uncovered was a life seemingly unremarkable on its surface. Eliza had grown up in the foster care system in western Pennsylvania. She had entered the system at approximately age 8 as a Jane Doe, found wandering alone in a shopping mall in Pittsburgh, seemingly confused and unable to provide consistent information about her identity or background. After multiple interviews with child psychologists, it was determined that she might have experienced trauma that had affected her memory. With no matching missing persons reports at the time, she had been given the name Eliza Grant by social services and placed in foster care. She had bounced between several homes throughout her childhood, showing what her files described as adjustment difficulties and attachment issues. She had been an average student who kept to herself, eventually aging out of the system at 18. Using scholarships and loans, she had attended community college, then transferred to the University of Pittsburgh, where she earned a degree in library science. Her current employer described her as quiet but competent, somewhat reserved but well-liked, a person who keeps to herself but is always willing to help. None of her colleagues or acquaintances had ever heard her mention the Thompson family or any belief that she was actually a missing child named Emma. Something had triggered this episode, this break with her established identity. But what? The police investigation revealed one potentially significant detail. 3 weeks before the break-in, Eliza had checked out several books from her own library's true crime section. Among them was a recently published volume examining famous unsolved child abductions in America. Emma Thompson's case was included, with photographs of the family and their home. Had this book awakened something in Eliza, a genuine recovered memory, or the beginning of a delusion? Jake Thompson, now a 13-year veteran of the FBI, arrived in Millfield 2 days after the break-in. His superior had granted him personal leave but warned against involving himself officially in the case due to the obvious conflict of interest. Still, Jake's FBI credentials gave him access to information and resources that might otherwise have been unavailable. His first step was to retrieve the case files from Emma's disappearance, boxes of reports, interviews, lead sheets, and forensic analyses that had yielded no answers 20 years earlier. His second was to visit Eliza Grant in jail. Unlike his mother, Jake had been prepared for the lack of physical resemblance. Cases of recovered missing persons often involve dramatically altered appearances, sometimes due to the passage of time, sometimes through deliberate changes made by abductors or by the victims themselves as they attempted to forge new identities. Sometimes they were simply not who they claimed to be. The woman sitting across from him looked nothing like the mental image he had maintained of his sister, the image of Emma at 6, aged forward through an imagination informed by family photographs and genetic probabilities. This woman was thin to the point of seeming fragile, with dark hair cut in a severe style that emphasized the hollows of her cheeks. Her eyes, though, held his attention. There was something in them that seemed simultaneously defenseless and challenging, as if she were daring him to disbelieve her while fearing exactly that outcome. "You don't recognize me," she said, before he could speak. "But I remember you, Jake. You taught me how to tie my shoes. You got so frustrated because I couldn't get it right. And then you felt bad and gave me your dessert at dinner." The detail was accurate. Jake had indeed taught Emma to tie her shoes, and there had been an incident involving shared dessert. But this was the kind of information that could potentially be researched, especially by someone with access to library resources. More compelling was what she said next. "You promised to take me to the observatory for my 10th birthday. You said we'd see Saturn's rings through the big telescope. I never got to go." This was not something that had ever been documented. It was a private conversation between siblings, a promise made in passing that had become significant only in retrospect after Emma vanished. Jake had remembered it during the initial investigation, the missed opportunity becoming one of many regrets that haunted him through the years. He had mentioned it to his parents once, years after the disappearance, during a rare family dinner when they had allowed themselves to reminisce. But it had never been recorded in any official capacity. Could this woman have somehow gained access to such an intimate detail? If so, how? And why? The DNA results were expedited due to Jake's FBI connections. 4 days after the break-in, the preliminary comparison between Eliza Grant's DNA and samples from the Thompson family was complete. The finding was definitive. Eliza Grant was not biologically related to the Thompsons. She was not Emma. Catherine received the news with a complex mixture of emotions, disappointment warring with a strange sense of relief. The possibility that this troubled young woman might be Emma had reopened wounds that had never fully healed. The confirmation that she was not allowed Catherine to retreat back to the familiar territory of her managed grief, her tempered expectations. For Robert, who had been more skeptical from the beginning, the DNA results confirmed what he had suspected, that Eliza Grant was either delusional or running a con, perhaps hoping for financial gain by claiming to be his long-lost daughter. He pressed for full prosecution, angry at what he perceived as an exploitation of his family's tragedy. Jake, however, was not satisfied. Something about Eliza's knowledge of his family, of details that weren't publicly available, continued to trouble him. If she wasn't Emma, how had she known about the hidden compartment in the kitchen, about the specific promise regarding the observatory? These weren't details that would appear in news coverage or even in the true crime book she had checked out. When confronted with the DNA results, Eliza's reaction was unexpected. There was no outburst, no denial, no insistence on further testing. Instead, she became very still, nodding slightly as if confirming something to herself. "I understand," she said, eventually to Jake, who had delivered the news. "But that doesn't change what I remember. It doesn't change what happened to me or to Emma." It was the first time she had spoken of herself and Emma as separate individuals. "Tell me what you remember," Jake said, activating the recording device he had brought to the jail. "Not what you've read or researched. Tell me what you actually remember about the day Emma disappeared." Eliza closed her eyes, her fingers interlaced tightly on the table between them. "I was riding my bike," she began, "my pink bike with the streamers on the handlebars and the white basket. Mum was making lunch, peanut butter and jelly with apple slices. I was supposed to stay in front of the house, but I rode a little further than I was allowed because I wanted to see the dog at the corner house, the big golden retriever that always barked, but wasn't mean." These details aligned with what was known. Catherine had indeed been preparing peanut butter sandwiches with apple slices. Emma's bicycle had had streamers and a white basket. There had been a golden retriever at the end of the block that Emma had been fond of visiting despite repeated instructions to stay closer to home. "A car pulled up," Eliza continued, her voice taking on a distant quality. "A dark blue car like the color of the night sky. The man inside asked if I could help him find his dog. He showed me a picture of a brown and white puppy. He said his name was Charlie and that he'd jumped out of the car a few blocks away. He asked if I would help him look." The description of the car was consistent with the limited eyewitness accounts from the day of the abduction. No name or description of the driver had ever been established, nor had any story about a lost dog been part of the public narrative. These could be lucky guesses, Jake knew, or they could be details created through research into similar abduction cases where lost pet stories were a common lure. "I told him I needed to ask my mum first," Eliza said. "That's what we were taught. Never go with strangers, always tell a parent." But he said it would just take a minute, that Charlie might run away if we didn't find him quickly. He said we wouldn't go far. I put my bike down and got into his car. Her breath hitched slightly. I knew it was wrong the moment I closed the door. I tried to open it again, but the handle on my side didn't work from the inside. He drove away fast, and I started crying. He told me to be quiet, that everything would be okay if I just stayed quiet. Jake felt a chill run through him. The detail about the disabled interior door handle had never been released to the public. It had been a theory developed by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit based on the lack of witnesses reporting a struggle or hearing cries for help. The technical term was a blitz abduction, quick, with minimal opportunity for the victim to resist or call for assistance. Modified door handles were a known tactic in such cases. "Where did he take you?" Jake asked, keeping his voice neutral despite the growing unease in his stomach. "To a house in the woods." "I don't know where exactly. We drove for a long time." I fell asleep, crying. When I woke up, I was in a bedroom with yellow wallpaper that had little flowers on it. There was a dresser and a bed and a small table with coloring books and crayons. The window had bars on it, like a jail in the cartoons. The door was locked from the outside. Eliza's description continued, detailing a captivity that had lasted approximately 2 years by her reckoning. Her abductor, a man she came to know only as Uncle Frank, had kept her isolated in a rural property. He had not physically abused her, but had maintained strict control through psychological manipulation, telling her that her parents had given her away because they couldn't afford to keep her, that he had paid them for her, that they would be in legal trouble if she ever tried to return to them. He had homeschooled her, limiting her education to basic reading and mathematics. He had allowed her no contact with the outside world, no television, no radio, no internet, no visitors. "There was one other girl there for a while," Eliza said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "She was older than me. I don't remember her name now, or maybe I never knew it." She didn't talk much. She disappeared after a few months. Uncle Frank said she had gone to live with her real family, but I heard her screaming the night before she vanished. I was too afraid to ask what happened. According to Eliza's account, her captivity had ended unexpectedly. One morning she had awoken to find the house unusually quiet. After waiting several hours for Uncle Frank to bring her breakfast as he normally did, she had tried her bedroom door and found it unlocked. The house had been empty. Signs of hasty departure were evident: drawers left open, food on the kitchen table, the front door slightly ajar. She had wandered outside to find herself in a heavily wooded area with no other houses in sight. She had followed what appeared to be a dirt driveway until reaching a paved road, then walked along it until being spotted by a passing motorist who had taken her to a nearby shopping centre and called the police. With no identification and her memory clouded by trauma and the deliberate misinformation fed to her by her captor, she had been unable to provide authorities with her real name or address. The timeline matched. Eliza had entered the foster system approximately 2 years after Emma's abduction, appearing as a lost child in Pittsburgh. The story was plausible in its broad strokes, but something wasn't adding up. If Eliza had been abducted as Emma, why didn't her DNA match the Thompson family? Jake pressed on this point. "I don't know why the DNA doesn't match," Eliza admitted, genuine confusion evident in her expression. "All I know is what I remember. Maybe I'm not remembering correctly. Maybe I'm not Emma, but I remember that house. I remember that family. I remember being taken. Something happened to me, and something happened to Emma Thompson. Maybe the answers are connected, even if I'm not her." It was a remarkable statement, a step back from her initial certainty about her identity, yet an insistence on the validity of her memories. Jake found himself believing, if not that this woman was his sister, then at least that she believed she was, or that she had experienced something traumatic connected to his sister's disappearance. He decided to pursue a different angle. "Tell me about your life after you were found, your life as Eliza Grant." What emerged was a fragmented account of a childhood spent in institutional care and foster homes. Eliza described difficulties connecting with foster families, persistent nightmares, and episodes of dissociation where she would lose time or feel detached from herself. She had been in therapy throughout her childhood and adolescence, diagnosed variously with PTSD, dissociative disorders, and attachment issues. As an adult, she had achieved a semblance of stability through routine and isolation, her job at the library providing structure, her solitary apartment offering safety. She had few friends and no romantic relationships. "The therapists told me I might never remember everything," she explained, "that some memories might be distorted or false, created by my mind to make sense of trauma. I accepted that. I built a life as Eliza Grant because that's who they told me I was. But then I saw that book with the picture of Emma Thompson and her house, and something clicked. Suddenly I remembered details I'd never recalled before. It felt like waking up from a very long dream." Jake left the interview with more questions than answers. If Eliza wasn't Emma and the DNA confirmed she wasn't, then how did she know so many intimate details about the Thompson family and home? Was she working with someone who had inside information? Was she somehow connected to the actual abductor? Or was there another explanation? He decided to dig deeper into the cold case files, particularly focusing on any other abductions or attempted abductions in the region during the same time period. Meanwhile, Catherine had been reviewing old photographs of Emma, looking for any possible resemblance to Eliza Grant that might have been obscured by the passage of time or deliberate alterations to her appearance. Finding none, she had reluctantly begun to accept that this strange episode would likely end as so many others had over the years, with raised hopes quickly dashed, with questions still far outnumbering answers. Robert, always the more pragmatic of Emma's parents, had already returned to his home in Chicago, convinced that Eliza Grant was either mentally ill or attempting to manipulate the family for reasons yet to be determined. Jake, however, couldn't shake the feeling that Eliza's appearance meant something, that this was not merely a random intersection of a troubled woman with a well-publicized missing persons case. His training and experience told him that coincidences of this magnitude were rare. There was a connection here, he just hadn't found it yet. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While reviewing hospital records from the Pittsburgh area, around the time Eliza had first appeared in the foster system, Jake discovered a Jane Doe admission to the emergency room of Pittsburgh Memorial Hospital. The child, estimated to be 7-8 years old, had been brought in by a man claiming to be her father. She had a high fever and symptoms of pneumonia requiring immediate treatment. The man had provided a name, Frank Watson, and an address that later proved to be false. He had left the hospital before completing the admission paperwork, stating he needed to move his car and had never returned. The child, once stabilized, had been unable or unwilling to provide her name or any details about her background. Most notably, the attending physician had noted possible signs of prolonged captivity or neglect in the medical report, citing poor dental hygiene, vitamin deficiencies, and unusual paleness, suggesting limited exposure to sunlight. The hospital had contacted social services, and the child had eventually entered the foster system as a Jane Doe, later named Eliza Grant. What caught Jake's attention wasn't just the timing and circumstances, but a specific detail in the medical report. The child had had a distinctive birthmark, a small, heart-shaped mark behind her right ear. Emma Thompson had had the exact same birthmark. It was documented in her missing persons report, and had been a key identifying feature in the search. Yet Eliza Grant, according to her current medical records, had no such birthmark. Jake arranged for a specialized examination of Eliza, focusing specifically on the area behind her right ear. A dermatologist with expertise in scar tissue and cosmetic alterations confirmed what Jake had begun to suspect. There was evidence of a small area where the skin had been deliberately altered, most likely through a minor cosmetic procedure. The birthmark had been removed. But if Eliza had Emma's birthmark, why didn't her DNA match the Thompson family? Jake ordered a more comprehensive DNA analysis, including tests for genetic chimerism, a rare condition where an individual carries two different sets of DNA. The results were extraordinary. Eliza Grant was a chimera. She carried two distinct DNA profiles, one that did not match the Thompsons, and another detected in smaller amounts in tissue samples from her saliva and hair follicles, that was a direct match to Catherine and Robert Thompson. She was, genetically speaking, both Eliza Grant and Emma Thompson. The explanation, when it finally emerged, revealed a truth more complex than anyone had imagined. Emma Thompson had not been the only child abducted by the man known as Uncle Frank. His real name was Franklin Watts, a former fertility clinic technician with a history of mental health issues who had developed delusional fixation on rescuing children he believed were being raised by the wrong families. The FBI, expanding their investigation based on Jake's findings, discovered evidence linking Watts to at least 3 other child abductions across multiple states during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Most disturbingly, they found documentation suggesting Watts had performed crude genetic experiments on his victims, inspired by his previous work at fertility clinics. He had attempted to alter Emma's DNA using bone marrow transplanted from another abducted child, a procedure that had resulted in her becoming a chimera, with the donor's DNA becoming dominant in her blood, while her original genetic material remained present in other tissues. It was an amateur version of a legitimate medical procedure sometimes used to treat certain blood diseases, performed under dangerous conditions without proper medical oversight. The other child, the donor, had not survived the procedure. This explained Eliza's confused memories about another girl who had disappeared after screaming. It explained why standard DNA tests, which typically used blood samples, had failed to identify her as Emma Thompson. It explained the gap in her memories, the dissociative episodes, the profound trauma that had shadowed her life. It explained everything except where Franklin Watts was now. The investigation into his whereabouts led to a grim discovery. Dental records confirmed that human remains found in a remote wooded area of West Virginia in 2004, previously unidentified, belonged to Franklin Watts. He had died of an apparent heart attack, his body found in a cabin that matched elements of Eliza's description of her place of captivity. Inside the cabin, investigators found journals detailing his delusional beliefs and crude medical experiments, along with evidence connecting him to multiple child abductions. He had died alone, his crimes undiscovered until now, leaving his victim to find her way back to her family through the fragmented memories that had survived his attempted erasure of her identity. The reunion of the Thompson family with their daughter, now a woman of 26, was complicated by 20 years of separation, by the psychological toll of extended captivity, by the biological alteration that had literally changed her DNA. Emma, who had lived as Eliza for the majority of her life, found it difficult to reconcile her memories of the Thompson family with the reality of these middle-aged strangers who looked at her with such desperate hope. Catherine, Robert, and Jake struggled to see their Emma in this quiet, guarded woman whose experiences had shaped her into someone so different from the child they had lost. There were moments of connection. Emma, Eliza, recognized the scent of the perfume Catherine had worn throughout her life. She remembered the specific way Robert hummed while concentrating. She completed a private joke that Jake had started without thinking. But there were also long silences, uncertainties, the awkwardness of strangers trying to be family. Recovery would be a long process, the therapists warned. Emma, Eliza, would need time and professional support to integrate her fragmented identities, to process the trauma of her captivity and the bizarre medical experimentation she had endured. The Thompson family would need guidance in supporting her without overwhelming her, in accepting who she had become rather than expecting her to revert to the 6-year-old they had lost. The criminal investigation continued, with authorities working to identify the other victims of Franklin Watts and to provide closure to other families of missing children. The medical aspects of the case attracted attention from clinical researchers studying chimerism and genetic therapies, though all involved were careful to protect Emma, Eliza's privacy and dignity. The woman who had broken into the Thompson house that October night would never fully recover her childhood identity. She would always be, in some sense, both Emma Thompson and Eliza Grant, her very cells carrying the dual legacy of the family she had been born into and the trauma that had reshaped her. But she was no longer lost. She had found her way home, guided by memories that had persisted despite every attempt to erase them, by connections that had endured beyond blood, beyond time, beyond the twisted interventions of a man who had sought to rewrite the most fundamental aspects of human identity. The case would eventually be documented in medical journals, in criminology textbooks, in psychological studies of trauma and resilience. It would challenge our understanding of identity, of memory, of the biological and emotional bonds that define family. But for the Thompson family and the woman who had been both Emma and Eliza, the most important aspect was simpler. After 20 years of separation, they had found their way back to each other. They had begun the long, complex process of healing. They had reclaimed the possibility of a future together, shaped by, but not defined by the past that had been stolen from them. In the years that followed, Emma Chuck Eliza would gradually build a new life that integrated elements of both her identities. She would continue her work as a librarian, finding comfort in the order and quiet of that environment. She would develop a close relationship with her brother Jake, whose persistence had ultimately led to the truth. Her relationship with her parents would evolve more slowly, complex feelings of abandonment and guilt requiring extensive therapy to address. She would become an advocate for missing children and for research into the psychological effects of long-term captivity, speaking at conferences and consulting with law enforcement when her unique perspective might help other cases. And she would keep, in her new apartment not far from Catherine's home, the photograph that had first triggered her memories. The little girl with auburn hair and a missing front tooth, captured mid-laugh during a family vacation to Lake Michigan. A reminder of who she had been, who she had become, and the extraordinary journey that had connected those two selves across 20 years of separation. For specialists in missing persons cases, in psychology, in genetic medicine, the Thompson-Grant case would provide insights and raise questions for decades to come. For the family at its center, it would remain a lived reality, complex, painful, miraculous, a daily negotiation between past and present, loss and recovery, trauma and healing. A testament to the resilience of human identity in the face of forces that would seek to erase it. A reminder that even the most carefully constructed deceptions can ultimately fail against the persistent power of truth. A story without a simple ending, because real life rarely provides the neat conclusions we crave. Instead, it offers continuation, the ongoing process of becoming, of remembering, of finding home, even after everything familiar has been taken away. And perhaps that in the end is the most honest kind of resolution we can hope for in the face of life's deepest mysteries.